Hello and welcome to this episode of Futures, the podcast series brought to you by CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. Hi everyone and welcome to the CIPS Futures podcast. We're very lucky to be joined by a powerful voice in the fight against modern slavery and forced labour in supply chains today. This is a complex challenge, one that CIPS members globally will be acutely aware of, and one that we explored on the podcast in October with the modern slavery charity Unseen. We talked then about the economic impact this global crime has, and the sheer scale of the challenge that organisations face in tackling modern slavery and rooting it out of their supply chains, as well as how the CIPS Foundation is supporting the charity in this fight. And we also underlined that most importantly, this is a human crime with human consequences. Today's conversation truly puts that into perspective. I'm humbled to have been joined by Moe Turaga for this episode, who for the last 8 years has been telling his personal story of lived experience of forced labour in the Australian horticulture sector. Today, Moe's mission is to make sure that people with lived experience are at the centre of the global response to modern slavery. Moe was over in the UK following his contribution to a panel at the United Nations Forum on Business and Human Rights in Geneva, and he kindly made time to visit CIPS HQ to share his story and messages for the procurement profession. So welcome, Moe. Thanks so much for joining us today. This is the second time you've given your voice to the CIPS audience this year. You joined us at the CIPS Futures Conference in Brisbane earlier this year in July. But really great pleasure to have you join us live in the UK. You've come all the way from Australia, so thank you for joining us.
No, thank you, James. Thanks for the invite to be here as well. And CIPS.
We'll get into your story in a moment. It's an incredibly powerful one. But can you just begin with why you feel it's so important to address the procurement and supply chain community on the subject of modern slavery and exploitative labour?
Yeah, look, I think it's really important to speak directly to the procurement and supply chain community because they hold the power, they hold the leverage in any organisation, the decisions they make, who to partner with, how to source, what standards to uphold. That has a direct impact on not just on the cost and efficiency, but on ethics, resilience, and then long-term value as well.
Yeah, and it's an increasingly important part that procurement and supply chain professionals are playing in tackling modern slavery. And it's
absolutely,
as we heard on our podcast in October from modern slavery charity Unseen, this is a complex crime, and crime is quite a key word in this. This isn't just a migration issue. This is a global criminal enterprise, I suppose, that is causing these challenges, right, for people at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, it's a whole community issue. It's you're not just banking on the government. You're banking on the business as well to do the right thing. Where they're sourcing, how they're sourcing, who are the people that are being affected, and how we're measuring that, and where we're getting their voice, and where we're taking their voice, and that's the most complex thing about it. They are hidden in plain sight, as we said that in Australia. They're very much in plain sight, but we're just not digging into it enough to make sure that we're going down through our tiers, whether it's tier 3, 4, 5, which I think that's where I normally land. We normally have the vulnerabilities down that level because at the tier 1s and 2s, it's pretty safe and comfortable because they have big issues. They deal with the bigger issues. It's just that who else are they sourcing from? And where they're sourcing from, and how is that being affected into the community? So, yeah.
You shared your story with the audience in Brisbane earlier this year. It was incredibly powerful. You could almost hear a pin drop in the room of nearly 200 procurement professionals listening to you. So, but there are many people who won't have heard your story. They won't have heard the stories of other people who have been victims of this crime and are in supply chain. So, could I just ask you to share your story, your experience with us?
Yes, absolutely, Matt. I was only 13 years old when my dad passed away. So, and I liked school. I love school. I was always a good student. And then, when he passed away, I saw the struggle with Mum trying to put food on our table with my other 2 siblings. So at 15, I jumped out of school, trying to help Mum out, being the eldest boy. It was always the nominated duty that if you're the eldest boy in the family, when your dad passes away, you've got to then pick that slack up and then try and be the head of the family. So I went looking for work, and I met his cousin. I met this family member that he was really like he was a church a church priest. He was a very religious man, and I couldn't see anything wrong with the whole situation. So he asked me to come to Australia to do a bit of work in the farms, and I took it up because I know his family members very, there's nothing wrong with it. We organized that and we got to Australia. But when we got to Australia, things have changed. Things got changed. That, he took our passport and he said, no, it's for safekeeping at a migration agent. So we never traveled before. So we know nothing. We didn't know any better. We just want to get there. We wanted to earn the $400 a week that he promised us that we were going to earn. So that was a big key. So we can send some money back to mum and then the other two siblings can stay at school. That's one of my biggest goals. And back then, there's no mobile phones, no internet like we have these days. So connecting with families was really very much not happening. Just because we were isolated, we didn't know how to work the systems. Everywhere to get the phones. There's no way we could bring our families in Fiji just to check up on what was going. So it wasn't until about 2.5 years later on that one of the things that we learned from when we were in Sydney, when we used to hang around with South American kids, was if you pop the coat hanger on the public telephone, you hear a little bit of a click, and then you can ring anywhere in the world for free, for however long you want. So we did that on these days, walking hours. We just tried it, and then it happened. So I rang Mum, and the first question that she said was, "Are you going to send some money home?" Like, I thought Mum was dramatizing, and no. My family member can't be saying the wrong thing because he keeps telling us every time I was visiting that our money is going to our families are well, and everything's going well. So, and then I said to Mum, I said, are you dramatizing, Mum? Mum said, no, we haven't seen your cousin for 2.5 years. We didn't know whether you're still alive or dead. So, and then, we just got angry. Remember that day, the whole four of us were just absolutely devastated. For that to happen. So we kept walking to church. And I think that was the blessing that we kept walking to church. We didn't lose hope. We just kept walking. Just go to church. And the ladies at church used to do bakings and then bring the baking in, whatever, whether it's cake or it's biscuits or whatever. And then we used to supplement our diets because that's the only time I can get some sweets for free, was going to church and get some sandwiches and stuff. So we did that. We got that. And then one of the ladies come up to us and so realized that our singing was not as good as what it used to be. We're not as happy. Yeah. And then she asked us, and then we told her the story. She goes, well, we haven't been paid. Looks like we haven't been paid for 2 years. And she offered us a bit of work. Yeah. So we thought, well, how do we do this now? Because there was a real fear of getting shot on the farm. Yeah. By the farm that we were in. So we had that fear behind us as well. And I think we just took guts. We just looked at it one afternoon and go, let's go. Once we worked out where the other farm was, we just stood up and walked, and we got there. And that's when I found out what freedom is. She paid us. She taught us how to drive tractors. She taught us how to drive any implements in the farm, forklifts, the whole lot. And that's when our life began in Australia. 2.5 years later, after we arrived, she just loved us like our own kids. And credit to them and the whole family. They even given us a house. I think we were rented for about $30 a week. I had my oldest kid in that house. Yeah. And she looked after that, my oldest kid as one of our grandkids, pushing her around the farm and taking her down to the packing sheds while I was working, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it was absolutely fantastic, and we could never go to anyone. We never go to the police or whatever. So there was no idea. We didn't have an ID. We know our passports. We had no money to go to travel anywhere. All we were given is $100 a week for a whole 8 of us. All we were given is $100 a week to get food. Yeah. So you get all the basics for all of us. It was just like we were eating bones that were supposed to be for dogs.
It's an incredibly powerful and I can feel the emotion still with you. It's coming out. You've obviously lived a life since then. You've got a family. Which is amazing to come out of such adversity. But the emotion stays very clearly with you, and I think that's something that you say you that $100 a week was essentially paying for minimum sustenance.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes it's difficult to you've got to put this into context and put it into your mind that this is modern slavery. That, you know, whether you want to use that term or not, this is exploitative, and there is a human as a victim at the center of all of this. And you talk about, you know, not knowing what to do to get out. That is, I imagine you speak to a lot of, you know, current victims and survivors. That is one of the hardest things for both them and for those, for example, procurement and supply professionals who might be potentially spotting there might be some issues in their supply chain. What is your advice to those who, you know, who want to act but don't know how?
I think for us, it's just, you know, who are we trusting? I think firstly, when we come out, we just didn't trust anyone. We trusted the farmer that came out, that gave us, you know, there was nothing wrong with what you gave us. What we really needed to do was what you gave us. So, and understanding what we went through. You know, we had co-workers, they were coming in, there were backpackers coming in as well. You know, we saw the freedom of their movement, the freedom of what they were doing. They can get up and go whenever they want. You know, and when you find people in this situation, it's really, really important that you talk to the right people, that you get your advice from the right people, because sometimes talking to police is the wrong thing, to the local police, because that can escalate the matter in a different way. And secondly, we've got to seek the consent of the person, that's the victim, to know where they want to get support from, how they want to get that support. Because it's not hard, it's very complex, and it's like a trauma, as you can see, for me, 30 years after, nearly 40 years after the experience, I still got traumatized by how I feel and all that sort of stuff. But I learned to manage that through conversation, through talking to people, you know, and because the only reason why is I want to encourage other survivors or other victims to make sure that they can stand stronger. There are safe people out there. There are good people out there that can do this properly, you know, can bring you out properly, can give you the freedom that you need. But yeah, you've got to come out with a bit of care and a bit of caution on you know, finding new people that's are in the system. So, and it's not hard. The social compliant auditors are finding it, but it's just where do we take the conversation next? And I think that's really need to be guided with a bit of caution. But yeah, let's talk to people who understands what to do in that situation. So, and normally, if it's survivor driven, I think it's the best way to, because that person will know what is the safest door to knock on. Because sometimes, you know, we think we're very, very helpful, and it's not very helpful for the victims. So.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard from, and SIPS Foundation are working very closely with modern slavery charity here in the UK called Unseen. For those of you who haven't listened to the episode with Emma Scott and Andrew Wallace in October, please do. They've got a modern slavery exploitation helpline, for example, here in the UK. I believe that's something, you know, you've got something similar that you work with the Australian Catholic Anti-Slavery Network and Domus 8.7. Is that right? Do you want to just tell us a little bit about what the work you do?
Yeah, I think we set up Domus 8.7 about 8 years ago, and it's genius work with Alison and looking at, you know, what are we doing when we discover people in these situations. So, and we set up Domus 8.7 for the same reason that we need to understand what remediation is, who is the remediation for, and then, you know, when we find people in these situations, how we deal with it. And one of the ways we deal with it, and we're very consultative team in Australia in regards to Jenny Stanger, Laura and Kate, we all work in that network of understanding the person first. You know, let's understand the person first, and let's see where we can shift, or who is the next best support for us that we can work with. And the only problem that we have in Australia at the moment is that we don't have a male safe house. You know, we have a ladies' safe house, which is run by Salvation Army, but we don't have a male safe house. So
amazing. I think it's so important for somebody like yourself to be able to speak to current victims and those who are, you know, going through it. Right? It's that they're going to speak to. Then they're going to understand that you've been through this experience, and I imagine there are only certain things that those who have been through this, and you know, the anger that you felt and the emotion, the raw emotion that you felt after recognizing that money was not going back to your family, you know, that's a very difficult thing to work through. So to you know, for them to speak to someone who has been there and done that, they can see that there is, I guess, some light at the end of the tunnel. When did you first decide to start telling your story? What kind of prompted you? Because, this can't have been easy to start telling.
No, look, it's a story that I had it with me for 30 odd years, and I didn't want to say anything about it to anyone because I wanted to protect my kids first. I knew the ramifications of it had gotten out with my kids still at school. How would that affect the taggings and then, being naming and shaming. It wasn't until 2016, Alison Rahil and Jenny Stenner, they were working for Salvation Army back then in Australia. They rang me up because they were coming up to Bundaberg, where I live in Queensland. That Bundaberg has been spotted as a hotspot for exploitation, for work exploitation. And sadly enough, we had a lady from UK, from Derbyshire, Rosie Alief, who was traveling to Australia as well because her daughter died. And back then they used to look for the 88-day visa to do 88 days work to do another, to get another 1 year visa in Australia. So, and her daughter sadly passed away, was killed on a site in Australia. And then, like I said before, I've never told anyone about the story till I listened to her. And then
Take your time.
Yeah. And kind of put me in a situation where I asked myself, what was my mom feeling that 2.5 years that we didn't connect, we didn't, she thought that we were dead and all that sort of stuff. And those thoughts come in. And I didn't realize that no one has spoken about it before. I've seen exploitation in the horticultural areas, but I didn't think much about it. I didn't think that is a modern slavery. I thought it was just physically and domesticated violence within each cultures. And then when I listened to Rosie, the penny drop, then I said, wow. And we were at the same time, the modern slavery movement in Australia was looking to get the legislation in. And Andrew Forrest was flying all around the world trying to get some small faith leaders to try and persuade the Australian government to come up with a modern slavery legislation, because the UK has established this in 2015. So, and that's when I said, because Jenny said to me, do you know anyone that will tell the story? Yeah. And I just said, Jenny, we don't want to get anything from these victims. And then and then I said to Jenny, but I've got a story to tell you. And Jenny couldn't believe it. And go, what? I said, yeah, I've touched my kids over. Yeah, but I think and I think it was the right time to speak out, because once I heard it, I didn't want it to happen to somebody else.
I think that's incredibly brave, and thank you for sharing in Brisbane. Thank you for sharing today. Thank you for sharing, across all the work that you do and all the advocacy work, because you now work with, I believe, both the federal and the state level anti-slavery commissioners in Australia, which is incredible. And this has obviously led to modern slavery legislation in Australia, and other countries since the UK's introduction in 2015, I think, have followed suit. And the hope is that this will continue. I believe New Zealand are beginning to look into it as well. So really important. And you shared your story on a panel this week, or last week, I believe, at the UN's Human Rights Forum in Geneva. I saw a lot on LinkedIn of all the great and the good of who are trying to tackle modern slavery and human rights issues in supply chains, who were there. Were there any kind of key takeaways for you from that conference that you can speak to?
I think being able to be heard is one. As a survivor advocate, and as a person with limited experience of forced labor, modern slavery. But I think for me, the biggest key takeaway is that people in developed countries really need to work twice as hard on identifying modern slavery. We're not exempted from it. Australia is an island, and people in Australia really also need to understand that modern slavery happens in Australia, same as in the UK, same as in all of Europe. Just because we're an island doesn't necessarily mean we're isolated from this issue. We've got 41,000 in 2023 by the Global Slavery Index, people. And I think that number is still low because it's just an estimate, and we've got to work hard. We've got to keep, My biggest dream is, I think I was talking to somebody last week, is if we can lower the numbers in 2027 by 5 million, I think we're starting to see the shift that the message is being heard. But if it keeps going up, if the trend keeps going up, then I think we've got a bigger problem than what it is. But I think, yeah, if we all work together, you continue to do what you're doing, keep amplifying the voices of persons with lived experience, keep the message out that modern slavery happens, doesn't matter where you are. It's not happening in just South Africa or China or whatever. It's happening all over the course of the world. And that's the message. I think the key takeaway from Geneva last week is just being able to sit on the panel, which means that, they understand that a person with lived experience here, and it not just as a rights holder, but also as a stakeholder in that forum, which is absolutely amazing. So, and to have all the international organizations there, especially UK, UK based as well. I was lucky enough to catch up with Eleanor Young.
Eleanor Lyons,
the
anti-slavery commissioner in the UK.
In UK. So, and just to have a brief chat about what is globally that we can work with together to, from a lived experience perspective. I understand our system in Australia quite well in regards to where we want to take it to and how much education we should be putting in, and then to listen to Emma this morning about the education, about, they get the education to the kids. That's fantastic, and some of the programs that they're running here, so it's absolutely fantastic.
As you say, it's a global challenge, so one that can't be fixed. But and every country, every even state level, are going to have their own modern slavery approaches, and legislation. But this is going to collaboration is going to be key to fixing this, right? And as you say, there are growing challenges on this, and I've read reports on climate change causing, vulnerable populations because of population migration. There are growing challenges. So to affect this and to move it in the right direction, only more of, the voices from yourself and others who are pushing against this are going to be needed. So
I'm glad to talk about climate change because there's more due diligence in climate reporting than what it is on modern slavery reporting at the moment, because government's not shifting quickly enough or not penalized. There's no penalties for businesses that are not complying at the moment. So, we just need to tighten that a little bit of edge up. If there's something that needs to change with governments, they need to tighten up that line with the businesses that if you are doing the wrong thing, we will punish you. But if you're doing the right thing, like I'm happy to stand beside them and say, look, this is what we need to be looking at. These are model companies, because there are model companies out there. It's just a smaller bits of the companies that are doing the wrong thing and not getting punished. So, and, we've got to merge in because there's an intersectionality of climate change and modern slavery in place at the moment, that affects the whole global movement from there to indigenous rights, where the exploitation is. Because the minute you say exploitation, it's everywhere. It's quite easy for other people that just have been making money on other people's vulnerabilities. So,
absolutely. Just one time for one more question, Moe, and I think, what is the message that you'd like to leave this audience with? So procurement and supply chain professionals, SIPS members, SIPS members take ethics tests, looking at the supply chains and also individually, thinking about their individual ethical procurement responsibilities. But what would be your message to everyone who are buying goods, buying services? What do you want to get across to those people?
But just be approach caution with your partners, who you're buying with, who you're sourcing with at the moment, because we all need allies, and it's good to have good allies. And it's also good to talk about the uncomfortable things. To ask the partners or ask the new business that you're approaching or you're sourcing with, do you have any modern slavery statements? Do you have any understanding what modern slavery is all about? Do you understand what it looks like? When you're looking at modern slavery, what does it look like? How are your compliance audits faced with your messaging, your key messaging as a business? And, don't be afraid to look deeper. Don't be afraid to ask, are those workers free to leave when they want to leave? Because that's one of the biggest key messages. For those workers that are unfree to leave, we know that they're in the tighter situation as slaves. So,
ask that extra question that you maybe think, oh, well, I might leave at that time. Next time, ask that question, be curious and try and
absolutely
go deeper step by step, wherever you can do so.
Yeah. Just make sure that you get in and go, yeah, bro, hang on. You do understand what modern slavery is all about.
Fantastic. Well, look, Moe, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I think so many people will find your story incredibly powerful. I know I did on stage. You put me under the spot to try and continue the conversation, but it was incredibly important and incredibly powerful. So thank you very much.
Thank you, James, and thank you for showing me UK, mate.
Pleasure.
Yeah, so
Anytime.
thank you.
So that's it for this episode of Futures. We're truly grateful to Moe for sharing his story with us. It is certainly one that leaves a lasting impression. We'll put some links in the episode description if you'd like to find out more about the work Moe and the team at Domus 8.7 do. And don't forget to listen to our episode on modern slavery with Andrew Wallace of Unseen and Madeline Bitten of Sodexo that we recorded back in October too. If you're a regular listener to the podcast, please do share this episode with your colleagues, teams and network. I thought it was an incredibly powerful message to share with the wider procurement and supply community and the impact they can have when tackling the issue of modern slavery. And do give us a rating on your preferred podcast platform too. We're set to continue with ever more important conversations on the future of the procurement and supply profession in 2026, so do join us for the journey. This podcast has been brought to you by SIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. For more information on SIPS, head over to sips.org, where you can find out more about our upcoming events and all the excellent training opportunities on offer. For now though, that's it from us. See you next time.